The morning sun cast long shadows across the royal palace courtyard as 8-year-old Princess Elena watched the changing of the guard from her bedroom window. Her bright green eyes sparkled with curiosity as she observed the precise movements of the soldiers below. Each step was calculated, each turn executed with military precision. The guards stood like statues in their red uniforms, their tall black hats making them appear even more imposing. Elena had always been fascinated by the daily ceremonies that took place in the palace. Unlike other children her age who might find such formalities boring, she saw them as elaborate puzzles waiting to be solved. Her governess often scolded her for spending too much time at the window instead of focusing on her lessons. But Elena couldn't help herself. There was something magical about the way everything in the palace operated like clockwork. Today felt different, though. Her mother, Queen Isabella, had been acting strangely all week. The Queen would whisper urgent conversations with her advisors, always stopping abruptly when Elena entered the room. Palace staff hurried through the halls with worried expressions, and even the usually cheerful kitchen maids seemed tense. Elena had tried asking her mother what was happening, but Queen Isabella would simply smile and say everything was fine, though her eyes told a different story. The sound of heavy footsteps in the corridor outside her room caught Elena's attention. She pressed her ear against the ornate wooden door and heard her mother's voice, low and serious, speaking with someone she didn't recognize. The stranger's voice was gruff and urgent, mentioning something about security protocols and immediate action. Elena's heart began to race. She had heard similar conversations throughout the palace over the past few days, always conducted in hushed tones and always ending abruptly when anyone approached. As the footsteps faded down the corridor, Elena made a decision that would change everything. She had noticed that her mother had been visiting the old library more frequently than usual, always carrying a small leather journal that she kept close to her chest. The library was supposed to be off limits to Elena during her lesson time, but her curiosity had grown too strong to ignore. She needed to understand what was happening in her home, what was causing the fear she could see in everyone's eyes. Quietly opening her door, Elena peered into the empty hallway. The thick red carpet muffled her footsteps as she made her way toward the library, her heart pounding with each step. She had explored every corner of the palace during her childhood adventures, but today the familiar corridors felt different, almost threatening. The portraits of her ancestors seemed to watch her with disapproving eyes, as if they knew she was about to uncover secrets that were meant to remain hidden. The library door stood slightly ajar, unusual for a room that was typically kept locked. Elena could see the warm glow of candlelight flickering from within, casting dancing shadows on the walls. She approached carefully, remembering the lessons her mother had taught her about moving silently through the palace. These skills, originally intended for playing hide-and-seek with the staff, now served a more serious purpose. Through the narrow opening, Elena could see her mother standing before a large bookshelf, her fingers tracing along the spines of ancient volumes. Queen Isabella's usually perfect posture was slumped with worry, and her normally immaculate hair hung loose around her shoulders. In her hands, she held the leather journal Elena had noticed, along with what appeared to be an old yellowed piece of paper covered in strange symbols and markings. Elena watched as her mother carefully placed the journal behind a particular book on the middle shelf, then moved to a different section of the library. The Queen pulled out a thick volume about royal genealogy and tucked the mysterious paper between its pages before returning it to its place. These actions were deliberate and practiced, as if Queen Isabella had performed this routine many times before. It was clear that her mother was hiding something important, something that needed to be kept safe from prying eyes. The sound of approaching footsteps from the main corridor sent Queen Isabella into action. She quickly straightened her appearance, smoothed her hair, and moved toward the library's main entrance. Elena pressed herself against the wall, holding her breath as her mother emerged from the library and locked the door behind her. The Queen's face had transformed back into its usual composed royal expression, but Elena had seen the worry in her eyes, the tension in her movements. As her mother disappeared down the corridor, Elena remained hidden in the shadows, her mind racing with questions. What was in that journal? Why was her mother hiding documents in the library? And most importantly, What danger was threatening their kingdom that required such secrecy? The 8-year-old princess felt a mixture of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. She had stumbled upon something significant, something that adults believed she was too young to understand. The palace bells chimed the hour, reminding Elena that her governess would soon be looking for her. She needed to return to her room and act as if nothing had happened. But the image of her mother's secret hiding place was burned into her memory. The journal behind the genealogy book, the paper tucked into the royal family history. These were clues to a mystery that Elena was determined to solve. As she made her way back to her room, Elena's mind was already formulating a plan. She would need to find a way to access the library when no one was around, examine the hidden documents, and piece together the truth about what was threatening her family and her kingdom. The little princess had no idea that her innocent curiosity was about to set in motion a chain of events that would test the very foundations of the royal guard's discipline and change the course of palace history forever. 3 days passed before Elena found her opportunity. The palace was busier than usual, with servants preparing for an important diplomatic meeting that would take place the following week. Queen Isabella had left early that morning to meet with neighboring kingdoms' ambassadors, and the royal staff was focused on cleaning and decorating the Great Hall. Elena's governess had been called away to help coordinate the preparations, leaving the young princess with strict instructions to practice her calligraphy in her room. Instead, Elena waited until the corridor outside her room fell silent, then carefully made her way toward the library. She had spent the past 3 days observing the patterns of palace life, noting when different areas were most likely to be empty. The library was typically deserted during the late morning hours, when most of the staff was busy with their daily duties and her mother was occupied with royal responsibilities. The heavy library door was locked, as Elena had expected. However, years of exploring the palace had taught her about the hidden passages and secret entrances that existed throughout the ancient building. Behind a large tapestry depicting a medieval battle scene, there was a narrow servants' entrance that connected to the library. The passage had been built centuries ago to allow staff to tend to the library's fireplace, without disturbing scholars and nobles who might be studying. Elena squeezed through the narrow opening, emerging behind the massive stone fireplace. The library was dark and silent, with only thin streams of sunlight filtering through the heavy curtains. Dust particles danced in the golden beams as Elena made her way toward the bookshelf, where she had seen her mother hide the journal. Her small hands trembled with excitement and nervousness as she reached for the genealogy book her mother had used as a landmark. The leather journal was exactly where Elena had seen her mother place it, wedged behind a thick volume about ancient royal bloodlines. As she carefully pulled it free, Elena noticed that the journal's cover was worn smooth from years of handling, and a small royal seal was embossed on the front. The pages inside were filled with her mother's elegant handwriting, but the content was unlike anything Elena had expected to find. The journal contained detailed observations about various palace staff members, including guards, servants, and even some nobles who frequently visited the court. Each entry was dated and included notes about behavior patterns, loyalties, and potential security risks. Elena's eyes widened as she read entries describing suspicious activities, unexplained absences, and concerns about possible infiltration by foreign agents. Her mother wasn't just a queen managing royal duties. She was actively investigating threats to the kingdom's security. One entry in particular caught Elena's attention. It described a pattern of communication between certain guards and unknown individuals outside the palace. Queen Isabella had noted specific times when these guards would be assigned to particular posts, and how messages seemed to be passed during these shifts. The entry concluded with a chilling observation. The formation protocols may be compromised. Traditional signals could be intercepted or manipulated. Elena's heart raced as she understood the implications. The precise guard formations she had admired from her window weren't just ceremonial displays. They were a complex communication system. The positioning of guards, their movements, and their timing all conveyed important information about palace security, royal schedules, and potential threats. If someone had figured out how to read or manipulate these signals, they could potentially coordinate attacks or gather sensitive intelligence. Moving to the second hiding place, Elena retrieved the yellowed paper from the royal genealogy book. The document was covered in symbols, diagrams, and notations that appeared to be a detailed breakdown of the guard formation codes. Someone had mapped out the meaning behind different positions, movements, and timing sequences. At the bottom of the page, in handwriting that didn't belong to her mother, was a note that made Elena's blood run cold. Phase 1 complete. Awaiting signal for final disruption. The realization hit Elena like a physical blow. Someone within the palace had been studying and documenting the guard communication system, preparing to use this knowledge for some sort of attack or infiltration. Her mother had discovered this plot and was secretly investigating, trying to identify the traitors before they could act. The increased tension Elena had noticed throughout the palace wasn't just about diplomatic meetings. It was about a very real and immediate threat to the royal family's safety. Elena carefully returned both documents to their hiding places, her mind racing with the weight of what she had discovered. She now understood why her mother had been so secretive and worried. Queen Isabella was trying to protect not just Elena, but the entire kingdom, from people who had infiltrated the very heart of palace security. The traditional guard formations that had maintained order for generations were being turned into weapons against the royal family. As Elena made her way back through the servants' passage, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat. Every sound made her heart skip a beat. The palace she had always considered her safe haven now felt dangerous and unpredictable. She realized that her innocent curiosity had led her to discover something that adults much older and more experienced than her were struggling to handle. Back in her room, Elena sat at her desk pretending to practice her calligraphy, while her mind worked furiously to process everything she had learned. She wanted to run to her mother immediately and reveal what she had discovered, but she knew that doing so would expose her unauthorized investigation. More importantly, she sensed that her mother was following a careful plan, and any disruption might put everyone in greater danger. Elena made a decision that would prove to be crucial in the days to come. Instead of revealing her knowledge immediately, she would begin her own careful observations of the palace guard rotations. Armed with the understanding of what the formations really meant, she could watch for the signs her mother's journal had described, the subtle communications, the suspicious timing, the potential signals that indicated betrayal from within. The 8-year-old princess had stumbled into a world of espionage and political intrigue that was far beyond her years. But her unique position in the palace gave her advantages that even her mother might not possess. As a child, Elena was often overlooked and underestimated, allowing her to observe without being noticed. She could move through areas of the palace that might be off-limits to adults, and her innocent questions could gather information without raising suspicion. As the afternoon sun began to fade, Elena positioned herself at her bedroom window once again, but this time her observation of the guard formations carried a completely different purpose. She was no longer simply watching a fascinating ceremony. She was looking for signs of treason, searching for the subtle indicators that would reveal which guards could be trusted and which ones were working against the crown. The little princess had become an unwitting spy in her own home, and the safety of the kingdom might depend on what she discovered next. For the next week, Elena maintained her regular routine while secretly conducting her own investigation. She attended her lessons with the governess, practiced her piano, and participated in formal dinners with visiting dignitaries, all while carefully observing the guard rotations and looking for the patterns her mother's journal had described. What she discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The guard formation system was far more sophisticated than Elena had initially realized. Different positioning patterns indicated various levels of security alerts, from routine daily operations to high-threat situations. The timing of guard changes communicated information about royal schedules, while specific hand signals and posture adjustments conveyed details about potential dangers or all-clear statuses. It was like watching a silent language being spoken throughout the palace, invisible to those who didn't know how to read it. Elena began to notice irregularities that aligned perfectly with her mother's concerns. During certain shifts, particularly those involving guards named Marcus and Devon, whom her mother had specifically mentioned in the journal, the formation patterns seemed slightly off. The timing was just different enough to be noticeable if you knew what to look for, but subtle enough that most people would dismiss it as normal variation. These guards were indeed manipulating the communication system, likely passing information to Confederates outside the palace walls. The breakthrough came during a particularly busy morning when the palace was preparing for a formal reception. Elena was supposed to be in her etiquette lesson, but she had convinced her governess that she felt unwell and needed to rest in her room. Instead, she positioned herself at a window that overlooked a less used section of the palace courtyard, where she had noticed Marcus spending time during his breaks. From her hidden vantage point, Elena watched as Marcus approached a specific stone pillar near the old well. He glanced around carefully, then reached behind the pillar and retrieved what appeared to be a small rolled paper. After reading it quickly, he produced a piece of charcoal and wrote something on the back before returning the paper to its hiding place. Within minutes, a palace gardener approached the same pillar, ostensibly to tend to nearby flowers, but Elena saw him palm the hidden message. Elena's heart pounded as she realized she had witnessed an active exchange of intelligence. The gardener, whom she recognized as someone who had worked at the palace for years, was part of the conspiracy. The network of traitors was larger than her mother had suspected, and it included people who had been trusted members of the palace community for a long time. The implications were staggering. If longtime employees could be compromised, then virtually anyone could be working against the royal family. That evening, during the formal reception, Elena found herself watching the guests and staff with new eyes. Every conversation seemed potentially suspicious, every gesture could be a signal, and every smile might be hiding treacherous intentions. She noticed that Marcus and Devon were both assigned to prominent positions during the event, places where they could observe the interactions between the royal family and foreign dignitaries. Their positioning would allow them to gather valuable intelligence about diplomatic discussions and future royal plans. Elena also observed her mother during the reception, noting how Queen Isabella's behavior had become increasingly guarded. The Queen spoke carefully with guests, avoided discussing specific details about future events, and frequently glanced toward the guards with what Elena now recognized as suspicion rather than confidence. Her mother was clearly aware that the palace security had been compromised, but she was trapped in a delicate situation where she couldn't openly accuse anyone without concrete proof. The most alarming discovery came near the end of the evening when Elena excused herself from the reception to use the ladies' room. As she walked through a quieter corridor, she overheard a conversation between Marcus and an elegantly dressed man she didn't recognize. The stranger was speaking in hushed tones about the signal and tomorrow's formation change. Marcus responded with details about guard positioning that would occur during the next day's ceremony, honoring visiting military officials from a neighboring kingdom. Elena pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear more of the conversation. The stranger mentioned something about disrupting the sequence and creating confusion during the transition. Marcus assured him that the guards loyal to their cause would be in key positions, and that the traditional formation protocols would be abandoned at the crucial moment. The implication was clear. They were planning to use the next day's ceremony as an opportunity to strike against the royal family when the guard formation would be most vulnerable. Racing back to her room, Elena's mind worked frantically to process what she had learned. The conspiracy was much more advanced than anyone had suspected, and it was set to culminate during tomorrow's military ceremony. Her mother's careful investigation had been thorough, but it hadn't uncovered the full extent of the plot or its immediate timeline. Elena realized that she possessed crucial information that could prevent a catastrophic attack on her family and the visiting dignitaries. The dilemma facing the 8-year-old princess was enormous. She could reveal everything she had discovered to her mother, but doing so would expose her unauthorized investigation and potentially compromise Queen Isabella's own careful plans. Alternatively, she could try to prevent the attack herself, but she was just a child with limited power and influence. The weight of the decision pressed down on her as she sat in her dark room, knowing that tomorrow's ceremony could determine the fate of the kingdom. Elena spent most of the night awake, considering her options and reviewing everything she had learned. She understood that the traditional guard formations were both the kingdom's greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. For generations, these protocols had maintained order and security, but now they were being turned against the very people they were meant to protect. The traitors had spent months, perhaps years, learning the system so thoroughly that they could manipulate it from within. As dawn approached, Elena made a decision that would require tremendous courage and intelligence. She would not tell her mother what she had discovered, at least not yet. Instead, she would find a way to disrupt the traitors' plans using the same communication system they intended to exploit. If the guard formations could be used to coordinate an attack, they could also be used to prevent one. Elena would use her mother's hidden knowledge and her own observations to send a signal that would alert the loyal guards and foil the conspiracy. The little princess had evolved from an innocent observer to an active participant in the dangerous game of palace intrigue. As she watched the sun rise over the kingdom she loved, Elena prepared to take actions that would either save her family or put them all in even greater danger. The next few hours would test not only her courage and intelligence, but also her understanding of the complex loyalty systems that held the kingdom together. The fate of the crown now rested in the hands of a determined 8-year-old who was about to discover just how much power a little princess could wield when she understood the hidden language of those sworn to protect her. The morning of the military ceremony dawned bright and clear, with banners flying throughout the palace courtyard and preparations reaching their final stages. Elena dressed carefully in her formal royal attire, knowing that today she would need to appear perfectly normal, while executing a plan that could save or doom her entire family. The visiting military officials from the neighboring kingdom had arrived early, and their colorful uniforms added to the pageantry of what was supposed to be a celebration of diplomatic friendship. Elena's plan was both simple and incredibly risky. She had spent the early morning hours studying her mother's journal one final time, memorizing the guard formation codes and the signals that indicated various types of alerts. According to the hidden documents, there was a specific sequence that would signal immediate threat from within, a code that would alert all loyal guards to the presence of traitors in their ranks. The challenge was finding a way to trigger this sequence without revealing her involvement or compromising her mother's investigation. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at noon, with the royal family appearing on the main balcony overlooking the courtyard where the military formations would take place. Elena knew from overhearing Marcus and the stranger that the attack was planned for the moment when the traditional guard formation would transition to honor the visiting dignitaries. This transition involved a complex series of movements that would normally demonstrate the kingdom's military precision, but in the hands of traitors, it would create chaos and vulnerability. Elena's opportunity came during the pre-ceremony preparations when she was allowed to walk through the palace gardens with her governess. The route took them past several guard posts where Elena could observe the positioning and identify which guards she believed to be loyal versus those she suspected of treason. Her young age and apparent innocence allowed her to approach guards and ask seemingly innocent questions that would help her confirm their loyalties. At the first guard post, Elena encountered Captain William, a veteran soldier whom her mother's journal had identified as completely trustworthy. Elena approached him with what appeared to be childish curiosity about the ceremony preparations. However, her questions were carefully calculated to convey critical information. She mentioned how excited she was about the special formation changes she had heard about, and noted how she hoped the guards would remember all their traditional signals during such an important event. Captain Williams' response told Elena everything she needed to know. His confusion about special formation changes confirmed that the loyal guards had not been informed about the traitors' plans to disrupt the traditional sequences. His immediate concern when Elena mentioned signal changes indicated that he understood the critical importance of maintaining proper protocols. Elena realized that she had found an ally, even if he didn't yet understand the full scope of what she was trying to communicate. Moving through the gardens, Elena repeated this process with several other guards, using her innocent questions to gauge their awareness and loyalty. She discovered that the conspiracy was more limited than she had feared. Most of the guards were loyal and unaware of any planned disruptions. However, this also meant that they would be unprepared when Marcus, Devon, and their confederates began implementing their attack plan. The crucial moment came when Elena encountered Marcus himself near the main ceremonial area. She approached him with the same apparent innocence she had shown the other guards, but her questions carried a very different purpose. She mentioned how she had been practicing the special hand signals she had seen guards using, and demonstrated a gesture that her mother's journal identified as the code for traitor identified. Marcus's reaction was immediate and telling. His face went pale, and he quickly looked around to see if anyone else had witnessed Elena's signal. Elena realized that her demonstration had achieved something unexpected. Marcus now believed that someone within the palace hierarchy knew about the conspiracy and was actively communicating about it. His fear and confusion would likely lead him to make mistakes or act prematurely, potentially exposing the full network of traitors before they could implement their plan. The 8-year-old princess had successfully planted seeds of doubt and paranoia within the enemy ranks. As the ceremony time approached, Elena positioned herself strategically on the main balcony with her family. But instead of simply observing the pageantry, she was watching for the signs that would indicate whether her intervention had been successful. The royal family waved to the gathered crowds while Elena's eyes tracked the movements of specific guards, looking for deviations from normal protocols that would signal the beginning of the attack. The visiting military officials took their positions in the courtyard, their bright uniforms creating a colorful display against the stone walls of the palace. The ceremony began with traditional trumpet fanfares and the presentation of flags, all proceeding according to the established schedule. However, Elena noticed subtle signs of tension among certain guards, nervous glances, hesitant movements, and a general sense of uncertainty that suggested her morning interventions had disrupted their carefully laid plans. When the moment came for the critical formation transition, Elena held her breath as she watched the guards begin their synchronized movements. For a few seconds, everything proceeded normally, with the soldiers moving into their assigned positions with military precision. Then, suddenly, Marcus broke from his assigned position and began signaling frantically to other guards, clearly trying to implement the attack plan despite the confusion Elena had created. This premature action was exactly what Elena had hoped would happen. Instead of a coordinated disruption that would catch the loyal guards off guard, Marcus's obvious departure from protocol immediately alerted Captain William and other veteran soldiers that something was wrong. The formation didn't collapse into chaos as the traitors had planned. Instead, it rapidly reorganized into a defensive pattern as the loyal guards recognized and responded to the threat from within their own ranks. Elena watched in fascination and terror as the carefully planned attack unraveled before her eyes. Devon and several other guards attempted to support Marcus's premature signal, but their movements were clumsy and obvious compared to the smooth response of the loyal soldiers. Within moments, the traitors found themselves surrounded and disarmed by their own colleagues, their conspiracy exposed and defeated not through violence, but through the failure of their communication and timing. The ceremony continued with barely a pause, as the loyal guards seamlessly absorbed the roles that had been abandoned by the traitors. The visiting military officials, unaware of the drama that had just unfolded, continued with their formal presentations, while the compromised guards were quietly escorted away from the ceremonial area. Elena's intervention had not only prevented the attack but had done so in a way that maintained the dignity and security of the international diplomatic event. As the royal family returned to the palace after the successful ceremony, Elena felt a mixture of relief, pride, and exhaustion. She had successfully used her mother's hidden knowledge and her own observations to protect her family and kingdom, but the experience had also shown her just how dangerous and complex the world of palace politics could be. The little princess had grown up considerably in the space of a few weeks, learning that even children could play crucial roles in protecting the things they loved most. In the hours following the ceremony, the palace buzzed with quiet activity as the security breach was thoroughly investigated. Elena watched from her window as several additional suspects were discreetly arrested, including the gardener she had seen exchanging messages with Marcus. The network of traitors was being systematically dismantled, but Elena knew that her role in exposing the conspiracy remained a secret that could have serious consequences if revealed. Queen Isabella appeared at Elena's door that evening, her face showing a mixture of relief, exhaustion, and something else that Elena couldn't quite identify. The queen sat on the edge of her daughter's bed, smoothing Elena's hair with gentle fingers while her eyes seemed to study the 8-year-old's face with new intensity. Elena tried to appear as innocent and uninformed as possible, but she could sense that her mother suspected something had changed. "Elena, my dear," Queen Isabella began carefully. "Today's ceremony was quite eventful, wasn't it? Sometimes unexpected things happen that help us discover important truths. The Queen's voice carried layers of meaning that Elena understood all too well. Her mother was probing, trying to understand how much Elena knew about what had transpired, and whether her daughter had played any role in the day's events. Elena chose her words carefully, walking the delicate line between honesty and protecting the secret of her investigation. It was very exciting, Mother. I noticed that some of the guards seemed nervous, and then there was all that movement during the formation change. Captain William handled everything so well. He seemed to know exactly what to do when things looked confusing. Her response was truthful while avoiding any admission of prior knowledge or active involvement. The Queen's eyes sharpened slightly at Elena's mention of Captain William, and Elena realized she had inadvertently revealed more than she intended. Queen Isabella was far too intelligent and experienced to miss the significance of an 8-year-old, noticing specific guards and their responses to crisis situations. The careful dance of concealment and revelation between mother and daughter was becoming increasingly complex. Captain William is indeed very capable, the Queen agreed slowly. He mentioned something interesting to me after the ceremony. He said that you had spoken with him this morning about formation changes and traditional signals. He was impressed by your knowledge of military protocols, knowledge that seemed quite advanced for someone your age. Elena's heart raced as she realized that her morning conversations with the guards had been reported back to her mother. Elena decided that partial honesty was her safest strategy. I've been watching the guard formations from my window for weeks, Mother. They're so fascinating, like a complicated dance with secret meanings. I started asking questions because I wanted to understand what all the movements meant. This explanation was truthful while omitting the crucial details about discovering her mother's hidden documents and conducting her own investigation. Queen Isabella studied her daughter's face for a long moment, clearly weighing what she believed versus what Elena was telling her. Finally, she spoke with a gravity that made Elena's stomach flutter with nervousness. Elena, what I'm about to tell you must remain absolutely secret even from your governess and the other palace staff. Today's events revealed that some people we trusted were working against our family and our kingdom. The situation was more dangerous than you could possibly understand. Elena nodded solemnly, maintaining her innocent expression while internally marveling at how much her mother still didn't know about her daughter's true involvement. Queen Isabella continued, the guard formations you've been watching aren't just ceremonial displays. They're a communication system that helps protect our kingdom. Today, that system was nearly used against us by people who had learned to manipulate it for evil purposes. How did you figure out who the bad people were? Elena asked, genuinely curious about how much of the conspiracy her mother had uncovered through official channels versus what Elena had disrupted through her unauthorized intervention. It took months of careful investigation, the Queen explained. I had to watch, listen, and gather evidence without letting the traitors know they were suspected. But today, something unexpected happened that exposed them before they could complete their plan. They made mistakes, acted too early, and revealed themselves to the loyal guards who were able to stop them. Elena realized that her mother still didn't fully understand what had caused the traitors to act prematurely and make the crucial errors that led to their exposure. Queen Isabella believed that her own investigation had somehow triggered the conspiracy's collapse, not knowing that her 8-year-old daughter had been the catalyst for the traitors' downfall. This knowledge gave Elena a strange sense of power and responsibility that was both thrilling and frightening. Will there be more bad people trying to hurt our family? Elena asked, this time with genuine concern rather than strategic questioning. There might be, her mother answered honestly. That's why it's so important that we remain vigilant and continue to trust only those who have proven their loyalty beyond doubt. The events of today have shown us that threats can come from within our own walls, from people we've known and trusted for years. The sadness in Queen Isabella's voice reflected the deep betrayal she felt at discovering that longtime palace employees had been working against the royal family. Elena felt a surge of protectiveness toward her mother, realizing how much weight and responsibility Queen Isabella carried on her shoulders. The Queen wasn't just managing royal duties and diplomatic relations. She was constantly working to protect her family and kingdom from threats that could emerge from anywhere. Elena's own investigation had given her a small taste of this burden, and she felt a new appreciation for her mother's strength and dedication. "Mother," Elena said carefully, "if I ever noticed anything strange or suspicious in the palace, something that might be important for keeping our family safe, would you want me to tell you about it?" This question was Elena's way of testing whether she should reveal her true knowledge and abilities, or continue to protect her secret while remaining vigilant for future threats. Queen Isabella's expression grew very serious as she considered her daughter's question. "Elena, you're still young, and I want you to have a childhood filled with joy and learning, not worry and suspicion. But if you ever saw or heard anything that made you genuinely concerned about our safety, then yes, you should tell me immediately. Just remember that palace life can be complicated, and things aren't always what they seem." Elena nodded, understanding that her mother was giving her both permission and warning. She could serve as an additional set of eyes and ears for palace security, but she needed to be wise about what constituted real threats versus normal palace activities. The conversation had established a new dynamic between mother and daughter, one that acknowledged Elena's growing maturity while maintaining appropriate boundaries. As Queen Isabella prepared to leave Elena's room, she paused at the door and looked back at her daughter with an expression that seemed to contain both pride and concern. "Elena, I want you to know that you're growing into a remarkably observant and intelligent young woman. Those qualities will serve you well as you prepare to take on greater responsibilities in our kingdom. Just remember that with great awareness comes great responsibility. We must use our knowledge wisely and always in service of those we're meant to protect." After her mother left, Elena lay in her bed thinking about the extraordinary day and the new understanding she had gained about her role in the palace. She was no longer just the innocent little princess watching guard formations from her window. She had become an active participant in protecting her family and kingdom. The secret knowledge she carried was both a burden and a privilege, one that would require her to grow up faster than most children her age. 3 months later, Elena's life had settled into a new rhythm that balanced her royal duties with her unofficial role as an observer of palace security. The guard formations had been restructured with new codes and signals that only the most trusted soldiers were taught, making future infiltration much more difficult. Captain William had been promoted to head of palace security, and Elena noticed that he occasionally glanced toward her window during formations, acknowledging the unspoken bond they had formed during the crisis. The captured traitors had revealed the full extent of their conspiracy during interrogation, confirming that they had been recruited by a rival kingdom, seeking to destabilize the region through internal sabotage. The plot had been years in the making, with agents gradually infiltrating the palace staff and learning the intricate communication systems that protected the royal family. Elena's intervention had not only prevented an immediate attack but had also exposed a much larger network of foreign agents operating throughout the kingdom. Queen Isabella had implemented significant security reforms based on the lessons learned from the conspiracy. New protocols required multiple verification steps for sensitive communications, and palace staff underwent enhanced background investigations. However, Elena noticed that her mother also seemed more relaxed than she had been in months, as if the successful resolution of the crisis had lifted a tremendous weight from her shoulders. The Queen's confidence in her security measures had been restored, and she could focus more attention on governing and diplomacy. Elena's own education had expanded to include more advanced studies in history, politics, and languages, subjects that would prepare her for greater involvement in royal affairs as she grew older. Her governess had commented on Elena's newfound maturity and perceptiveness, not knowing that these qualities had been forged in the crucible of palace intrigue. Elena excelled in her studies, driven by a deeper understanding of how education would help her protect and serve her kingdom in the future. The most significant change in Elena's life was the development of a subtle but meaningful communication system with her mother. Queen Isabella had begun including Elena in certain discussions about palace security, asking for her observations and opinions on matters that were appropriate for a young princess to consider. Elena was careful never to reveal the full extent of her knowledge, but she could offer insights and suggestions that helped her mother make informed decisions about security protocols. One morning, as Elena watched the new guard formations from her window, she noticed something that made her heart skip a beat. A new guard recently hired to replace one of the arrested traitors was positioned in a way that didn't quite match the established pattern. His stance was slightly different. His timing was off by a few seconds, and his hand positions didn't align with the current signal codes. Elena's trained eye immediately recognized these as potential signs of another infiltrator, who hadn't yet learned the new security protocols. Instead of immediately alerting her mother, Elena decided to conduct a careful observation period to confirm her suspicions. Over the next several days, she watched the new guard's behavior, noting his interactions with other staff members and looking for any signs of the secretive communication patterns she had learned to recognize. Her patience was rewarded when she observed the guard attempting to use outdated signal codes that would have been effective before the security reforms but were now meaningless under the new system. Elena realized that this guard was likely a backup agent who had been activated after the primary conspiracy was exposed, but who hadn't been properly briefed on the security changes that had occurred. His presence indicated that the rival kingdom hadn't given up their efforts to infiltrate the palace, but it also suggested that their intelligence network had been significantly damaged by the exposure of the original plot. This time, Elena decided to share her observations with her mother immediately, understanding that her earlier success had earned her credibility in security matters. She approached Queen Isabella during their regular afternoon tea, carefully explaining what she had noticed and why she believed it indicated a security concern. Elena was careful to frame her observations as the result of her ongoing interest in guard formations rather than as evidence of active surveillance activities. Queen Isabella listened to Elena's report with growing concern and admiration. The Queen's questions were sharp and focused, designed to test the accuracy of Elena's observations and determine the appropriate response. When Elena provided detailed descriptions of the guard's positioning errors and attempted signal usage, Queen Isabella realized that her daughter had developed an understanding of palace security that rivaled that of trained professionals. "Elena," the Queen said after hearing the complete report, "your observations are extremely valuable, and I believe your concerns are justified. You've shown remarkable skill in recognizing potential security threats, and I think it's time we formalized your role in helping to protect our kingdom." Elena's heart raced with excitement and pride as she realized that her mother was offering to include her officially in palace security operations. The investigation of the suspicious guard confirmed Elena's assessment completely. The man was indeed a foreign agent who had been inserted as a replacement for one of the arrested conspirators, but his handlers hadn't properly prepared him for the new security protocols. His capture led to the discovery of additional agents in other parts of the kingdom, effectively dismantling the remaining network of infiltrators. As Elena stood at her window that evening, watching the guard formations that had started her journey into the world of palace security, she reflected on how much her life had changed. She was no longer just a curious child observing interesting ceremonies. She had become a valued guardian of her kingdom's safety, using her intelligence and observational skills to protect everything she loved. The little princess had discovered that the most powerful weapon against those who would harm her family wasn't military might or political maneuvering, but rather careful attention, patient observation, and the courage to act when action was needed. The guard formations continued their ancient dance of protection and communication. But now Elena was an active participant in their silent language, helping to ensure that the signals would always serve loyalty rather than betrayal. Queen Isabella joined Elena at the window, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder as they watched the evening formation change together. "You've grown into quite a remarkable young woman," the Queen said softly. "Your father would be very proud of how you've learned to use your gifts in service of our people." Elena smiled, feeling the weight and privilege of her newfound responsibilities, knowing that she would continue to grow into the role that destiny had prepared for her. The palace had been secured, the traitors had been defeated, and the kingdom was safe once again. But Elena understood that vigilance was the price of continued safety, and she was prepared to pay that price for as long as her kingdom needed her protection. The little princess had found her true calling, and she would spend the rest of her life perfecting the art of seeing what others missed and acting when others hesitated. The guard formations would continue their eternal watch, and Elena would be watching with them, ready to ensure that their ancient promise of protection would never again be broken from within.